The year is 1500. A 6-year-old boy walks barefoot into a pine forest at 4 in the morning. The temperature is below freezing. He carries an axe heavier than his arm and a single tortilla in his belt. By nightfall, he must return with firewood, water, and a working knowledge of 3 constellations. He is not being punished. He is being educated. Across the Atlantic, Spartan boys his age are starving in the Agoge, beaten, frozen, robbing each other for food. Most will not see 20. The Aztec child will. How did the Mexica build a system that outbroke Sparta without breaking the boy? Subscribe if you want the school they hid from you. Start with the age. Spartan training, the famous Agoge that Plutarch wrote about with such enthusiasm 1,200 years later, began at 7. The Aztecs began at 3. Page 86 of the Codex Mendoza, the most complete primary record of Mexica daily life, lays out the entire developmental schedule in painted images that survived the conquest because the friars who saw them could not bring themselves to burn something that detailed. At age 3, a Mexica child receives 1 tortilla a day and watches his parents work. He learns by observation alone. No instruction, no correction, no language used to teach, just watching. At 4 and 5, his ration rises to 1.5 tortillas a day, and he begins to participate. He carries water from the household cistern. He learns the names of every household tool, every utensil in the kitchen, every implement in the workshop, every cord and basket and pot in the storage room. By 6, his ration is 2 tortillas a day, and he carries firewood. He is taken into the marketplace to memorize the geography of the city. He learns to identify the Calpulli boundary stones, the temple platforms, the canals, the names of the streets, the families who run each stall, the daily price of maize, the location of every public well. By 7, the age a Spartan boy was just being torn from his mother and handed to a state institution that would brutalize him until he stopped being a child. The Mexica child has already spent 4 years in structured education. This is not a small detail. This is a 4-year head start that compounded across the entire population. While Spartan parents were preparing to lose their son to the Agoge forever, Mexica parents were already 2/3 of the way through their own version of military preparation. And they did it without removing the child from the family. The household was the first classroom. The mother taught discipline and the calendar of feast days and the responsibilities owed to the women of the Calpulli. The father taught skill and the obligations of male civic life, when to fight, when to plant, when to pay tribute, when to speak. The grandmother taught memory, the lineage of the ancestors, the stories that anchored the child in 2,000 years of Nahua history. Each elder of the household had a documented role in the curriculum. The child stayed connected to his people while becoming what the empire needed him to become. A Spartan boy at 7 knew that his mother's face was the last face he might ever see in private. A Mexica boy at 7 knew his mother had been training him for 4 years already, and that she would still be there at the end of the day when he came home with the firewood. Sparta took the boy, the Mexica raised the boy. Now look at the punishments. Spartan correction was simple and blunt. Beat the boy, starve the boy, send him into the woods to steal or die. There was no documentation, no schedule, no progression. The instructors decided in the moment what the child needed and applied it without record. The Mexica correction was a calibrated escalation documented page by page in the Codex Mendoza, painted in clear color so that any parent in any neighborhood of any Mexica city could see the consequences of each stage of disobedience and understand exactly what would happen if his child crossed a line. At 8 years old, a misbehaving child is shown the instruments of correction, but not yet touched. The point is psychological. The child must understand what waits if the behavior continues. At 9, he is pricked on the wrists with the spines of the maguey cactus, sharp enough to bleed, controlled enough not to maim. The pain is precise. 2 or 3 pricks, then the parent stops, watches the child, gives him the chance to correct. At 10, he is struck with a stick across the shoulders for repeated disobedience. The Codex specifies the number of strokes by offense: 3 strokes for lying, 5 for theft within the Calpulli, 8 for striking a younger sibling. This is documented punishment, not improvisation. At 11, he is held over a fire of smoldering chili peppers and forced to inhale the smoke until his eyes stream. The chili is specifically chosen because it does no permanent damage. The lungs recover, the eyes recover. The memory does not. At 12, he is bound at the wrists and ankles and left to lie on damp ground through the night. The cold and the immobility teach a lesson the warm punishments cannot. Each punishment is sequential. Each escalates only if the previous one fails to correct behavior. Each is recorded. Each is reviewed by an elder of the Kalpuli who can intervene if the parent oversteps. The Mexica figured out, by the early 15th century, that the worst thing you can do to a child is not the punishment itself, but the absence of any structure around it. Think about what that means for you. You live in a society where parenting books are written by strangers, where the law treats every form of physical correction the same, regardless of intent or method, where no one in your neighborhood has the authority or the responsibility to tell you that your method is wrong. The Mexica had a published curriculum of pain, calibrated, public, reviewable, with escalation rules and intervention rights. Compare that to Sparta, where a boy who failed could be killed by his own instructors with no procedure and no record. The Mexica designed pain as a tool. The Spartans used it as a filter, a way to discard the weak. The Aztec system assumed every child was salvageable. The Spartan system assumed most were disposable. One philosophy built an empire of 5 million. The other collapsed after a single lost battle at Leuctra, never recovered, and was a tourist curiosity within a century of its supposed peak. If this is the kind of history you come here for, a like genuinely helps. Here is the part Hollywood never shows you. At 15, the Mexica child entered one of two institutions. The Telpocali or the Calmacac. The Telpocali, the house of the youth, existed in every neighborhood of every Mexica city. Every plebeian boy in the empire attended one. Every single one. The Aztecs had universal mandatory education 1,000 years before Prussia invented the model that Europe would later copy and call modern. The Telpocali taught military skill, agricultural work, civic duty, religious obligation, the genealogy of the Kalpuli, the legal code of the city, the agricultural calendar of the region, and the names of every plant in the medicinal herbarium. Boys slept in dormitories on reed mats placed directly on the floor. They ate communally from clay bowls. They trained at dawn with weighted packs of stone and sand. They worked public construction by day, moving limestone for temple repair, dredging canals, maintaining the chinampas. The Florentine Codex describes the typical Telpocali day in clinical detail. Wake at the third watch of the night, around 2 in the morning. First religious observance and bloodletting at the household altar. Pre-dawn military drill until sunrise. Public works until noon, communal meal of maize, beans, and chili. Weapons training until sunset. Second religious observance. Communal evening meal. Sleep at the 9th hour after sunset, roughly 9 o'clock at night. The graduating Telpocali student at age 20 was not just a soldier. He was a citizen who could fight, farm, build, navigate, recite the sacred chants, and recognize the signs of disease in his neighbors. The Calmac, the house of the cord, took the children destined for the priesthood, the judiciary, and the highest military commands. There they learned astronomy, the calendar system of 260 days interlocked with the solar calendar of 365, the law codes of every region under Mexica, the history of the empire from its mythic origins, the rhetoric of formal speech, the chants of the gods, the technical pharmacology of every medicinal plant in the central Mexican herbarium, the geometry of architecture, and the mathematics of trade. Bernardino de Sahagún, the Spanish friar who spent 50 years compiling what would become the Florentine Codex, described the Calmacac curriculum in terms that left European observers stunned. Mexica priests could calculate solar cycles to within a few minutes of modern computation. They tracked Venus with accuracy that took European astronomy until Galileo to match. They predicted eclipses with a precision that we still cannot fully explain, given the instruments available to them. The poet king Nezahualcóyotl, who designed the dike that kept Tenochtitlan dry for a century, was a Calmacac graduate. The Tlatoani Moctezuma II, who memorized the lineage of every noble house in the Triple Alliance, was a Calmacac graduate. The architect who designed the Templo Mayor in its final form was a Calmacac graduate. Both institutions were staffed by Tlamatinaim, those who know things, priests and elders who had spent decades in the Kalmakak themselves and were then certified by the high priesthood to teach. The position carried legal weight. A Talamatini who beat a student without documented cause could be removed and punished publicly. A Talamatini who allowed a student to die through negligence could be executed. The teaching profession in pre-conquest Mexico society was the second most respected occupation in the empire. Behind only the high priests had been Tlamatine themselves before promotion. Compare that to Sparta, where the Irene who supervised the Agoge was a 19-year-old former graduate with no credential, no training, no oversight. He hit the boys he was responsible for until they obeyed or died. The Mexica produced their teachers on purpose. Sparta produced its teachers by accident. The graduation ceremony itself reveals the philosophical gap between the two systems. The Mexica student left the Telpocali at 21 in a public ceremony witnessed by his entire Kalpuli. His teachers presented him with his first Ichkahupili armor and a wooden practice makuahutal. He was sworn in as a warrior citizen with rights to vote in the Kalpuli Council, to marry, to own land, to bear arms. If he had distinguished himself in war during his Telpocali years by capturing enemies in battle, he could enter the elite orders, the Quaupiltin, the Eagle Warriors, or the Okelopiltin, the Jaguar Warriors. Promotion required documented enemy captures, not parental wealth, not noble birth, not personal connection. A peasant boy who captured 4 enemies became an Eagle Warrior with the legal status of a noble. A noble who captured none remained without rank. The Spartan boy at 21 was given a black soup made of pork, blood, vinegar, and salt, the famous melas zomos that travelers from across Greece described as inedible, and assigned to a Sicilian, a communal mess hall where he would eat the same meal every day for the rest of his life. He had no vote. He had no property. He could not leave the city without permission. He could not marry openly until 30. The Spartan citizen was a soldier on permanent rotation. The Mexica citizen was a man with a profession. Now consider what the Spartans actually did to their boys. The Agoge began at 7 with the immediate and permanent separation of the child from his family. He was given a single piece of clothing, 1 cloak, no shoes, and told that he would wear it summer and winter for the next 13 years. He was assigned to a herd, an Ajole, under the Irene. He slept on reeds that he cut himself from the banks of the Eurotas River, and if he tried to soften the bed with anything else, he was beaten. He was fed deliberately less than he needed, and told that he must steal the rest. If he was caught stealing, he was beaten, not for the crime of theft, which the Spartans considered admirable, but for the failure of being caught. At 13, he was sent to the altar of Artemis Orthia for the ritual whipping called diamastigosis. Boys were beaten with rods until blood ran from the wounds, and some did not stand back up. The ritual was held annually. Spectators came from across Greece to watch. The Spartan state celebrated the boys who endured longest and ignored the ones who died. At 18, he entered the Crypteia, the secret police of Sparta, in which young men were sent into the countryside at night to terrorize the Helot serf population, to kill any Helot who appeared too strong, too clever, too capable of organizing resistance. Murder was the graduation requirement. The boys who could not bring themselves to slit a sleeping man's throat did not become Spartiates. The boys who froze in winter did not become Spartiates. The boys who failed to steal enough to feed themselves did not become Spartiates. Plutarch, writing 3 centuries after Sparta was already a withered husk of itself, estimates that between 30 and 40% of the boys who entered the Agoge did not complete it alive. Modern classical historians have raised that estimate to as high as 50% in certain generations. The Mexica child, during the same years of his life, was sleeping 4 hours a night on a reed mat in the Telpocali dormitory, hauling limestone for the Templo Mayor, perforating his earlobes and tongue with maguey spines as a religious obligation, training with real weapons against opponents trying to land hits hard enough to draw blood. He was suffering. He was exhausted. He was bleeding. He was not dying. The Aztec educational system did not produce the Spartan mortality ratio. Colonial records indicate that mortality among Telpocali and Kalmakak students was comparable to general population mortality for the same age cohort. The Mexica designed a system that demanded everything from every child and lost almost none of them. Sparta designed a system that demanded everything from every child and buried half of them. And then it lost. The Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC ended Spartan military supremacy in a single afternoon. The Theban general Epaminondas put his strongest troops on the left wing instead of the right, and broke the Spartan line in less than 3 hours. After Leuctra, Sparta never fielded a major army again. The city declined to a curiosity within 50 years. The system that buried half its children to produce a fighting force could not survive a single decisive defeat. Sparta filtered. The Aztecs forged. Hollywood will tell you the Spartans were the toughest people who ever lived. The actual record, the page-by-page imagery of the Codex Mendoza, the encyclopedic detail of the Florentine Codex, the cross-referenced primary sources Camilla Townsend assembles in Fifth Son, says something the textbooks softened to keep the Greek heroes on top of the Western story. The Mexica took more children, started them earlier, kept them longer, demanded more of them, and lost fewer of them than any society in the ancient or medieval world. The result was not abstract. Camilla Townsend documents that the Mexica state could mobilize 200,000 fighting men inside 96 hours from a flat-footed start. Sparta at its peak fielded 8,000. The Mexica capital held a continuous urban population of 250,000 people for over a century. Sparta peaked at 40,000 citizens, never produced a written literature of its own, never built a single architectural monument that survives intact, and collapsed in a single afternoon at Leuctra. The Mexica built pyramids that still stand 5 centuries after the conquest tried to dismantle them. They produced literature in 2 writing systems, hieroglyphic for the priests, pictographic for the population. They left astronomical observations that anchor modern archaeoastronomy. They left legal codes that the Spanish colonial administration adopted because they were better than what Europe had brought. They produced poets whose verses are still recited in Nahuatl-speaking villages of central Mexico. Nezahualcóyotl, Tochihuitzin, Cuacuautzin, names you will not find in any Western humanities curriculum, but which were known by every educated Mexica child the way an English child knows Shakespeare. They produced engineers who designed the largest aquatic city in the pre-modern world. They produced surgeons who could perform trepanation with a 90% survival rate. And they did all of it on the back of a school system you have never heard of, taught by men whose names you will never learn, built 1 tortilla and 1 stick of firewood and 1 perforated earlobe at a time, starting at age 3, ending at age 21, breaking no child who could be salvaged, and demanding everything from every child who walked through the door. Sparta gave you a slogan. The Mexica gave you a civilization. This is the lie of the noble Spartan. The toughest children in the pre-modern world did not die screaming in Laconian forests, robbing each other for food while the Agoge instructors watched and graded. They woke before dawn in Tenochtitlan. They ate 2 tortillas. They walked into a freezing pine grove with an axe heavier than their arms. They came back at sunset carrying firewood, water, and a verse of poetry their teacher would expect them to recite by memory the next morning. Then they did it again, for 17 years. And when they were finally grown, they could fight, read, build, calculate, heal, govern, and remember. Sparta gave you a single page of military history. The Mexica gave you a civilization. One of those is a slogan you bought from a movie. The other is an archaeological record so complete that we are still cataloging it 500 years after the empire fell. If what brings you here is the education they erased, the systems they buried, the children they refused to let you see, not the cartoon you were given in school, then this channel was built for you. Subscribe, and you will see what comes next. The next time you watch a film about 300 Spartans dying gloriously at a mountain pass, remember this. Somewhere in the same century that those Spartans died, a 6-year-old in a city of 250,000 people walked barefoot into a frozen forest before dawn, came home that evening alive, taller, smarter, and more dangerous than any Spartan boy would ever be. He did not know he was outperforming the most famous warriors in Mediterranean history. He just knew his mother was waiting at the door with his second tortilla, that his father would test him on the names of the constellations he had seen on the walk home, that his grandmother would correct his pronunciation of the lineage chant before he was allowed to sleep. He grew up to read the stars, build a pyramid, write a poem, and command an army of 50,000 men. The Spartan boy his age, the one Hollywood made you cheer for, never made it past 19. He died in a forest in Laconia with a rock in his hand, having stolen a piece of bread he was not strong enough to escape with. His mother never learned what happened to him. The Mexica child grew old in his Calipuli, taught his own grandchildren the names of the constellations, and was buried with the obsidian blade he had carried since the day he graduated, the Telpoc Cali. His name is carved on the foundation stones of the Templo Mayor. His descendants still speak his language in the highlands of central Mexico. His school burned in 1521, but the children it raised carried the curriculum in their hands for 4 more centuries. That is the school they hid from you, and it built an empire while Sparta was already a footnote.